This is the tale of our friend Canny Coyote and his great adventure. You see, Canny Coyote had always lived, played, and hunted near his den in the meadow, never having wandered far from home. One particular day, a distant cousin of Canny's, Wily Coyote, came along and told Canny Coyote a few tales about distant adventures. Hearing these tales, Canny Coyote also wanted adventures. Hence, Canny set out one fine summer day to seek adventures of his own. When Canny Coyote left his home meadow, he went in no particular direction. He didn't know where to find an adventure or what an adventure would be like, so our friend didn't know what he was looking for at all. He soon met Big Black Buffalo, but Big Black informed Canny Coyote that his name was really Black Bison, not Buffalo, but most folks called him Black Buffalo anyway. After a brief chat, Canny Coyote asked Black Bison if he knew where to find an adventure. Black Bison had spent all summer with his family and friends eating the green meadow grass along the river. The only adventure he knew anything about was playing with his brothers and sisters and their friends. He told Canny Coyote that he was sorry, but he couldn't help him. He couldn't help him anyway because he had to care for his new baby sister. Canny Coyote was disappointed, but nevertheless, he told Black Bison thank you and traveled on in search of an adventure. In a little while, he met Dandy Deer browsing in another place. Canny Coyote didn't really know Dandy Deer. He had heard of him. He knew that Deer often ran around a lot, and thinking that Dandy Deer could possibly help him find an adventure, he asked Dandy Deer the same question. Dandy Deer said he had never had an adventure, but he believed his sister Dancing Deer had had an adventure a year or two ago. Dandy said his sister Dancing Deer lived in the next meadow, just over the hill. So our friend Canny Coyote ran along up over the hill into the next meadow to find Dancing Deer. When there, Canny Coyote looked all around for Dancing Deer, but didn't see her anywhere. Canny Coyote was not too disappointed, though, as he saw so many beautiful flowers in this meadow. He ran through it with great joy. Here he spotted the red Indian paintbrushes, mountain sunflowers, and many other bright ones. Suddenly, our friend spotted a large animal near the edge of the meadow. Surely this was Dancing Deer. Canny Coyote ran toward the magnificent animal, only to learn it wasn't Dancing Deer at all. It was Magnificent Moose, eating grass in a small thicket of trees at the edge of the meadow. Nearby was Majestic Moose, his close friend. At once, Canny Coyote asked if either of them had any idea where to find an adventure. Magnificent Moose said he really didn't know what an adventure was, so he wasn't able to help very much. His friend Majestic Moose said he thought he knew what was meant by an adventure. His uncle, Milford Moose, had told him about an adventure he once had while traveling through a distant forest on another mountain. It seems Uncle Milford had seen some men walking among the trees nearby. This had frightened him very much, so he turned and ran away from them. After exchanging a few tales about each other's experiences, the three parted company. Canny Coyote moved on. Canny Coyote decided that if Majestic Moose's Uncle Milford Moose had an experience like that in the mountain forest, maybe he would go there, hoping for an adventure there as well. So up the mountain he went. He walked through the trees, always looking for that adventure. After climbing nearly to the top of the mountain and not finding his adventure, he decided to stop and rest for a while. This he did. He looked around at the forests and valleys and decided this was a beautiful place. It was so quiet and peaceful here that he rested for quite a while before moving on. Off in the distance he saw, on the mountainside, something white. It covered an entire hillside. Canny Coyote thought to himself, maybe this is an adventure. So he hurried off in search of it. On his way to the white hillside, he heard a loud roar. Maybe that roar was a sign of an adventure, so Canny Coyote at once decided to investigate the source of that noise. The roar became louder and louder as he neared it. As he rounded a curve on the trail he was taking, he suddenly saw the source of the noise. It was a giant, thundering waterfall on the river. Canny Coyote spent a little while there looking at the beautiful yellow wall of the canyon below the falls, as well as watching the water cascade down. Eventually, he moved on to find the white hill he had seen earlier. When he reached the white hillside, he realized it was only some white, pink, and gray rock with hot water running from it. It was pretty, but he had seen running water before, as he lived by a flowing river. He thought about his home meadow as he looked at the white hillside. Oh, the river in his belly was filled with cold water rather than hot water, but that, in his mind, was only a small difference. After thoroughly investigating this white hillside, he decided that since it had several very large springs, and that since they were hot, he would call it the Mammoth Hot Springs. After a while, he moved on in search of his adventure. Canny Coyote hadn't gone very far when he ran into a gathering of elk. He thought, surely they knew about some place where an adventure could be found. There were so many of them, and they were all gathered together. He called loudly, asking the entire group where he could find an adventure. They didn't answer. They looked at each other as if to say, an adventure? We know nothing about an adventure. Finally, one of them, Eloquent Elk, moved over to where Canny Coyote was standing and told Canny Coyote he couldn't help him, but he believed that Burly Bear, who lived up on the mountain meadow, could probably tell him about adventures. Eloquent Elk said that Burly Bear was a wise old bear and had traveled a lot. On his way to the mountain meadow, he saw more beautiful flowers. He enjoyed them very much and took his time going through flower beds. And off in the distance, he spotted Burly Bear beating the bushes for berries. Burly Bear was too busy eating to stop and talk to Canny Coyote. Burly Bear was always busy eating in summer, as he had to eat enough during the summer so he could sleep all winter during the cold, snowy winter weather. However, Canny Coyote told him about his search for an adventure and how he would like to have one. Burly Bear told him between mouthfuls of Saskatoon berries that, yes, he had once experienced an adventure, but simply couldn't take the time to tell Canny Coyote about it. Nevertheless, he told him that on up the mountain lived Whistler Marmot. He said Whistler lived up there where a lot of loose rocks were found. Mr. Marmot would probably take time to talk about an adventure if he asked politely. This made Canny Coyote happy. He hurried along to the rock pile Burly Bear had told him about. Sure enough, there sat Whistler Marmot, sunning himself on a rock. Now Whistler Marmot was a shy individual and started to run when Canny Coyote approached him, but he soon came back. Canny Coyote told him what Burly Bear had said and then asked Whistler Marmot if he could help him. Whistler Marmot sat still for a moment. Then he called some of his family over to discuss the problem with them. They put their heads together and talked it over for a while. Once again, Canny Coyote was disappointed, as they could not come up with an answer. However, the Marmots said they had an excuse, as all of them slept for about 8 months of the year during the winter, and of course, lots of adventures could take place during that time. But they gave Canny Coyote some hope, for nearby was Little Haymaker. Whistler pointed to him and remarked that the pika known as Little Haymaker stayed up all winter and should be able to help. At once, Canny Coyote headed for Little Haymaker. Now, Little Haymaker was busy gathering grass for the winter, so he would have enough food for himself and his family when the heavy snows came. He couldn't really stop, but he did admit that he didn't sleep much during the cold winter, but he also couldn't help much as he stayed in his rock den under the snow most of the time, and couldn't truly tell Canny much about adventures. Naturally, Canny Coyote was disappointed again, but since he had already gone this far, he decided to travel on to seek out an adventure. He was high up on the mountainside and enjoying himself when he spotted some gray animals that looked a bit like deer. When he came closer, he recognized them as Mrs. Rocky, the mountain sheep, and her family and friends. They were out for a stroll with their young lamb. One more time, our friend asked about an adventure. One more time he was disappointed, but Mrs. Rocky said a distant relative of theirs lived even higher up on the mountain and could see very far in all directions. This relative, Snowball the goat, may know something. At once Canny Coyote started up the mountain to find Snowball. He climbed higher and higher until finally he found Snowball among the small bushes and shrubs near the top. Although Snowball had time to chat, he simply couldn't help with the search. He told Canny Coyote that he stayed high up on the mountain top most of the time, where there weren't any adventures that he knew of. Canny Coyote thanked him and started down the mountain. By now, Canny Coyote was getting very discouraged and trudged along with his head hanging low. In time, he almost forgot what he was looking for, when suddenly he heard a loud noise nearby. He thought, "Here is an adventure," but once again he was disappointed, as all it was that made that noise was another spring of hot water that was also belching steam. Canny Coyote just paused for a moment, then moved on down the mountain. In a short while he came to a strange area. Along the trail he saw steam coming out of the ground and streams running through colored beds. This he had to investigate because it could be an adventure. Looking down onto the area from a small hill, he soon discovered that someone else had been there earlier, as it was painted many colors and was very bright in the sunshine. This basin was silvery white and reminded him of a bit of some pans he had seen some months earlier. He believed they were called porcelain pans, so he simply called this area the Porcelain Basin. Having spent too much time here, he hurried on. Along the way, he spotted a large spider web. Canny Coyote decided to investigate it a bit. To his surprise, he spotted a spider on it. Almost at once, a grasshopper jumped into the web and got stuck. The spider then hurried to the grasshopper and began wrapping more web around it to hold it until he was ready to eat it. He spotted a few other insects that the spider had already wrapped into the web. He kind of felt sorry for them, but there was nothing he could do about it. Canny Coyote saw a lot of interesting things along the way, such as nutcrackers, ground squirrels, flowers, waterfalls, and birds. After a while, he again heard that loud roaring noise he had heard earlier. When he looked up, he saw hot water and steam squirting up into the air. It was rising over 100 feet and was coming in bursts. This excited Canny Coyote a bit, so he looked all around him and saw many springs belching steam and hot water. This was interesting to Canny Coyote, who wanted to examine them even more. He walked among them for a while in amazement to see what caused all this commotion, noise, and smell. The smell here resembled some of the smell he was familiar with when he went food hunting. It smelled a bit like the rotten eggs he had smelled at some earlier time. However, what he wanted was an adventure, not a lot of hot water, so he moved on. After a short time, he spotted a deer in the nearby forest. It was Dancing Deer. Dancing Deer had left her meadow to visit the forest for a day. Dancing Deer liked the forest. It was always beautiful and quiet. Canny Coyote approached Dancing Deer, and he and Dancing Deer talked for a while. But once again, nothing about an adventure was discovered. So Canny Coyote bid her a fond farewell and trotted on. Canny Coyote decided he had looked long enough and would head for home, for he was getting tired and hungry. Walking along a big river, he came upon Mama Moose and her calf. Canny Coyote wondered if this was the same river that flowed through his home meadow. But Mama Moose and her calf were munching on succulent willow twigs on the bank of the river. Since Mama Moose had a baby to take care of, she didn't have much time for adventures, so Canny Coyote wished her good luck and bid her a good day and departed for home. Trotting along the trail, he came to a large lake. It had rained earlier in the day and was still raining not far away. Being near to sunset, it was a good time for rainbows. If the sun shone through the evening clouds, there may be one tonight. Suddenly, a small break in the clouds allowed the sun to shine on the rain, causing a beautiful rainbow over the blue waters of the lake. Just before he reached his warm den in the meadow, he met Randy Raven and some of his raucous friends. Canny Coyote started telling them about his journey. They soon became very quiet while Canny Coyote told them of all the things he had seen and heard. He also told the ravens about all the talks he had with the forest dwellers. The ravens were thrilled with his story. When Canny Coyote finished his tale, Randy Raven said that Canny Coyote had really had a wonderful adventure. Randy's friends, all talking at once, agreed and said they had never had such an adventure and envied Canny Coyote very much. In a little while, Canny Coyote realized what they had told him. He, Canny Coyote, had experienced a wonderful adventure, the likes of which few of the forest people ever experienced. After that, our happy friend hurried home to tell his family all about his adventure. After all, Canny Coyote had experienced a real and exciting adventure. Canny Coyote now realized that adventures are everywhere and everyone has them. He now knew that everyone has interesting adventures, but everyone doesn't realize it. Canny Coyote was determined not to forget this lesson when again he felt lonesome or bored. Yes, he thought, adventures are everywhere and can be found and can be had for the taking, for they are all free. Plant photosynthesis